Picture a room deep in the basement of a police precinct. It's quiet, the air is maybe a little stale.
Pretty atmospheric, yeah.
Right, and sitting at this metal desk, under a flickering fluorescent bulb, is a cold case detective.
Okay, I can picture it.
And they are just staring at a towering stack of faded manila folders. I mean, inside those files are interviews, photographs, timeline notes, evidence logs.
Just boxes and boxes of information.
Exactly. And the detective knows something that is incredibly frustrating yet entirely true. The answer they are looking for, the actual truth of what happened, was likely visible years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was documented, it was, mentioned briefly in some passing remark, but at the time, it was misinterpreted.
Or minimized, maybe.
Yes, minimized, or it just got lost entirely in a web of competing narratives. So, the case was boxed up and filed away.
It is such a haunting image, really. The idea that the solution was sitting right there on the desk, but the people looking at it they couldn't see the pattern.
They just missed it.
Yeah, they couldn't decode what was right in front of them because they were overwhelmed by the noise of the moment.
And today, we are taking that highly cinematic true crime concept and applying it to a world that feels completely different, but actually shares some really profound, high-stakes similarities.
It really does.
We are looking at a fascinating source document for our deep dive today. It's titled, What a DSL Can Learn From a Cold Case Detective.
Such a great title.
It is. Now, for you listening, a DSL is a designated safeguarding lead. If you work in or around education, you know exactly who this is.
Right, they're the point person.
Exactly. This is the person inside a school setting whose primary responsibility is protecting students from harm, abuse, and neglect.
Which is an incredibly heavy burden.
It really is. But even if you haven't set foot in a school for 20 years, the psychological traps these professionals face, they are exactly the same ones you fall into at your job or, even in your own family.
Absolutely. It's human nature.
It is. It's about how our brains actively hide long-term risks from us just to make our short-term lives a little easier.
And the stakes for a DSL are just incredibly high. I mean, they are dealing with the physical and emotional safety of children day in and day out.
Every single day.
Yeah. And what our source material does today is draw this really profound and honestly sometimes uncomfortable intersection between cold case investigations and school safeguarding.
Uncomfortable is definitely the word for it.
It really challenges us to look at the mechanics of how information is processed over time. Why do glaring red flags get mistaken for background scenery?
Right. So the mission for our deep dive today is to explore that intersection. We need to ask a really hard, uncomfortable question.
Let's hear it.
When a problem, whether it's a safeguarding concern in a school or, a toxic dynamic in your own workplace, when it's marked as closed, was it actually resolved?
That is the million-dollar question.
Or did it just become temporarily quieter? Because if we accept that closure is often just a comforting lie we tell ourselves, it immediately makes me wonder.
Wonder what?
Where is the actual truth hiding while we're busy patting ourselves on the back?
Right. We have to look at the illusion of closure. The source points out this core insight, which is that a case often closes not because the actual risk disappeared, but because the momentum of the investigation faded.
The energy just runs out.
Exactly. Staff changed, the immediate crisis passed, or the system itself just ran out of steam.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I was thinking about this mechanism, and it reminds me of a homeowner who has a check engine light flashing on their car dashboard.
Oh, I know that feeling.
We all do.
Yeah.
It blinks for a week, they stress out about it, but they are just too busy with work and life to take it to the mechanic. And then one morning, the light just stops blinking.
And you feel this massive wave of relief.
Exactly. The homeowner thinks, oh, great, it's fixed. It was just a glitch. But the engine isn't fixed at all. The sensor just burned out, or the problem went dormant.
Right, the car's still broken.
Yeah, the engine is just quietly waiting to break down on the highway at the worst possible moment.
What's fascinating here is the psychology behind why we accept that burned-out sensor as a victory. I mean, it makes complete sense when you break it down.
How so?
Well, institutions, like schools, fundamentally crave certainty and comfort. When a teacher has 30 kids in a room, cognitive overload forces their brain to categorize threats.
Just to survive the day.
Exactly. Ambiguity is an open loop, and open loops drain mental RAM. If a threat appears to be handled because, say, the student stopped acting out, the teacher's brain defensively snaps that file shut.
They need to save energy for the kid who is currently throwing a chair across the room.
Precisely. The source material talks about how organizational narratives distort our interpretation to serve this need for closure. Schools unconsciously favor narratives like, that issue has already been dealt with.
Or they're doing much better now.
Yeah. These phrases are practically a collective sigh of relief for an overworked staff. It is a biological survival mechanism to lean on those assumptions, rather than sit in the exhausting discomfort of ambiguity.
Which makes the source's strategic reframe so powerful. It states plainly reduced visibility is not always reduced risk.
That's a great way to put it.
Just because you don't see the behavior anymore doesn't mean the harm has stopped. It just means the symptoms changed.
Think about the specific examples provided in our source. You might have a student who made a disclosure attempt. Maybe they hinted that something was wrong at home,
Right.
but the adults were distracted, or they didn't respond with enough gravity. So what happens? The student disengages. They stop trying.
And to the busy school system, the problem behavior stopped. The check engine light turned off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the risk is entirely unchanged. Or consider harmful peer dynamics, like bullying. Often, an intervention doesn't actually stop the bullying.
It just pushes it underground.
Yes, it moves from the cafeteria to private group chats. It becomes less visible to the teachers, which gets recorded on paper as a win.
Or worse, the student learns to use emotional masking. I mean, an adult intervenes and the child realizes that showing their pain just causes a massive uncomfortable disruption.
Right, they learn it's easier to pretend.
Yeah, so they project that everything is fine, they smile, they turn in their homework, while the underlying trauma is just completely unaddressed.
It's chilling.
It really is. The idea that a child learning to hide their pain more effectively is literally being recorded in a school system as a successful intervention.
It is a dark reality of any overwhelmed system. The behavior that disrupts the adult's day is fixed, but the child's vulnerability remains.
So if closure is often a mirage and the real evidence is being masked or pushed underground, how does anyone actually spot the danger?
Well, this brings us right back to our cold case detective.
Yeah.
The evidence is almost always there, but it exists in fragments.
Bits and pieces.
Yeah. In a school setting, safeguarding concerns rarely present as one giant, undeniable red flag. A predator doesn't usually announce themselves, and a crisis at home doesn't usually look like a movie scene.
Right, it's not always obvious.
It's not. The clues exist as fragmented observations, low-level reports, and slight behavioral shifts spread out across multiple adults over months or even years.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces were randomly distributed across 5 different teachers' desks.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, like the math teacher has a piece because the student has been falling asleep in first period. The PE teacher has a piece because the student suddenly started wearing long sleeves in the spring.
And the cafeteria worker notices they stopped eating lunch.
Right. Nobody can see the actual picture on the front of the puzzle box until someone bothers to gather all those pieces and put them on the exact same table. But I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for the professionals on the ground. In a busy high school with 2,000 kids, there are tens of thousands of jigsaw pieces floating around every single day.
Oh, absolutely. It's chaotic.
Kids are exhausted from staying up late playing video games, kids change their fashion styles, kids decide they hate school food. How in the world do we train professionals to practically separate a meaningful, dangerous pattern from just the random, everyday noise of being a teenager?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the ultimate challenge of the job. And it comes down to the physical mechanisms of how we manage data.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The source emphasizes a crucial professional truth. Isolated concerns may look minor, but patterns rarely are. The way you separate the noise from the signal is by maintaining and rigorously analyzing what they call safeguarding chronologies.
Safeguarding chronologies, let's make that concrete. What does that actually look like in a modern school? We aren't talking about a physical manila folder in a filing cabinet anymore, right?
Usually, no. It's a secure digital system, a centralized software platform where every minor report, every behavioral blip is logged.
So everyone has access to the same file.
Right. The lunchtime supervisor logs 8 alone today. The math teacher logs missed homework 3 days in a row. The school nurse logs frequent stomach aches.
And individually, in isolation, these adults see nothing but everyday teenage noise.
Exactly. But the system, or the DSL reviewing the system, begins to see a cluster. You can't just look at today's incident in a vacuum. You have to look at the cumulative pattern.
Let's walk through what that actually feels like in practice. Imagine a hypothetical scenario to see how these dots connect over time.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's say year one, a student starts falling asleep in class. The teacher logs it. The school calls the parents. The parents say, oh, they got a new phone. They're staying up too late.
Which makes perfect sense.
Right. The file is marked resolved. Year two, the same student starts withdrawing socially and wearing baggy clothes. The counselor logs it. It's written off as a teenage awkward phase. File closed.
Very common.
Then year three, the student has a massive aggressive outburst in the hallway, just screaming at a teacher.
And right there is the trap. If the school leadership looks at year 3 in a vacuum, what do they see?
Well, they see an aggressive, insubordinate kid who needs to be suspended. It looks like a pure behavioral issue.
But if a trained DSL opens the chronology and zooms out, connecting year 1, year 2, and year 3 on the same table,
It changes everything.
it does. Suddenly, that isn't a behavioral issue anymore. That is a 3-year pattern of a deteriorating home life, potential self-harm, and a child whose nervous system is finally redlining.
Wow. The outburst wasn't the problem. The outburst was the alarm bell for a problem that started 3 years ago.
Exactly. It completely shifts the paradigm, and it connects to another core insight from the text. Time changes perspective.
Wait, is that just because time gives us emotional distance from the incident, or is the source saying the actual culture of the school changes while the file is just sitting in the drawer?
It's the latter. Safeguarding understanding culturally evolves. As staff gain more experience, as new research emerges, and importantly, as our societal understanding changes, old evidence takes on entirely new meaning.
So the facts don't change, but we do.
Right. The facts in the file do not change, but the lens we view them through does. The source gives a very powerful example regarding attention-seeking behavior.
Oh, that phrase is everywhere. They're just doing it for attention.
Yes. 10 years ago, a student acting out might have been disciplined, labeled merely as seeking attention, and the file was closed with a detention.
Case closed.
But today, a well-trained DSL looks at that exact same historical file and reframes that behavior as an unmet safeguarding need.
Oh, wow.
The behavior was a frantic cry for help that the system simply didn't have the psychological vocabulary to translate at the time.
So the kid was basically screaming, notice me, something is wrong, and the system said, stop trying to make us notice you.
Which is just tragic. Another example the source brings up is recognizing coercion that was previously misunderstood as consent. As our societal understanding of harmful sexual behavior and power dynamics has evolved, a situation between two students from a few years ago might look very different now.
Something that was written off as teenage drama.
Exactly. What was called mutual might clearly look like predatory coercion through today's lens. A safeguarding interpretation that seemed totally reasonable to a principal 5 years ago might desperately deserve reassessment today.
I completely understand the logic of that. But to actually put those puzzle pieces together, to voluntarily open up old logs and say, we got this fundamentally wrong, that requires something that is incredibly difficult for human beings to do.
It requires deep humility.
Yes. Professionals have to be willing to admit that something may have been missed or that their earlier conclusions were flawed. And I really want to push back on the emotional reality of this for a second.
Go for it.
Think about the psychological dread involved here. Imagine being a well-meaning, deeply caring teacher. You reopen a file, look at the timeline, and the horrific realization washes over you. I failed this student. My intervention actually caused them to mask their trauma.
That is a terrifying thought.
It completely goes against human nature to actively seek out our own devastating mistakes, especially when the consequences involve a child getting hurt. Our brains are practically hardwired to protect our egos and avoid that kind of crushing guilt.
This raises an important question, and you are touching on the single biggest barrier to effective review. The natural human reflex when confronted with past failure is intense defensiveness.
Naturally, we want to protect ourselves.
We want to justify our past actions based on the information we had at the time. Source material tackles this by focusing heavily on the leadership layer of an organization.
How does leadership fix that?
It argues that a strong safeguarding culture has to completely neutralize that fear by replacing a culture of blame with a culture of learning-oriented reflective review.
So it's shifting the energy away from retroactive punishment. Like, we aren't trying to fire the teacher who missed the sign in 2023.
No, not at all.
We're moving it toward proactive care for the student today.
That is the only way it works. Leaders have to instill a very specific mindset shift. The goal of reopening a cold case is not to prove that the past was wrong. The goal is protecting the student more effectively right now.
That makes a lot of sense.
If leadership creates an environment where people are terrified of being penalized for missing a subtle clue 3 years ago, then nobody will ever bring up old files. They will just leave the skeletons in the closet to protect their jobs.
Which leads directly to what the source calls the quiet harm. If the adults are too scared or too busy to look back, the people who suffer are the ones making the least noise.
The quiet harm is perhaps the most heartbreaking concept in the document. Some students need adults to notice them again.
The ones who slip through the cracks.
Yes, these are the students who stop asking directly for help. They withdraw entirely after feeling unheard or misunderstood. They continue carrying their unresolved trauma very quietly in the back row of the classroom.
That is so sad to think about.
True safeguarding leadership means having the intuition to notice the concern that everyone else has unconsciously stopped seeing. You have to actively reflect on the students who simply disappeared from the concern lists too quickly and ask yourself a hard question.
What's the question?
Did they get better or did they just get quieter?
Man, did they get better or did they just get quieter? That is a question every manager, parent, and teacher needs on a sticky note on their desk.
Absolutely.
But, having built up this whole true crime, cold case detective framework, the source actually takes a crucial moment to safely deconstruct it. There is a whole section called the honest bit, where the cold case detective analogy breaks down.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, schools are not police precincts and teachers are not cops.
And thank goodness for that. The text is very clear on what DSLs must not take from this analogy. Safeguarding must never become a suspicion-driven reinvestigation.
We aren't doing interrogations here.
No, you cannot treat the school corridors like a crime scene, interrogating kids about things that happened 2 years ago, just to tie up loose ends. Students and staff deserve fairness and proportionality. Not every resolved case requires reopening.
So what does this all mean? We want to bring a balance, right? The analogy I keep coming back to is the difference between a lifeguard and a forensic investigator.
Okay, I like where this is going.
We want our educators to be attentive lifeguards. And how does a lifeguard actually scan the water? They don't stare unblinkingly at one single child until they find something wrong.
Right, that would be counterproductive.
Exactly. They use the 10-20 rule, 10 seconds to scan their zone, 20 seconds to reach a victim. They are using passive but intense pattern recognition.
Looking for anomalies.
Yes. They are scanning the surface for ripples, for shadows, for a displacement in the water that looks out of the ordinary. They are vigilant, but their goal is rescue and safety. We don't want teachers to be forensic investigators dusting the students' lockers for fingerprints and building prosecutorial cases.
That lifeguard analogy perfectly synthesizes the text's critical differences chart. The document breaks down the contrast between the two professions beautifully.
How does it lay it out?
Well, a cold case detective investigates unresolved crime, but a DSL protects and supports students. A detective does retrospective evidential analysis. A DSL does ongoing relational safeguarding.
Ah, relational. That's a key word.
Exactly. The detective works within a criminal justice framework in pursuit of factual resolution. They need to know exactly what happened and who is to blame. The DSL works in an educational, pastoral environment in pursuit of human-centered protection and well-being.
They aren't trying to build a court case.
Right. The DSL doesn't always need to know every factual detail of the past to provide a safe harbor in the present.
Human-centered protection. That requires such a delicate touch. It requires what the source calls well-being literacy.
Yes, well-being literacy.
And from what we've discussed, well-being literacy isn't just knowing the dictionary definitions of mental health terms.
Yeah.
It's the practical ability to recognize cumulative emotional harm and maintain relational monitoring over time.
That's spot on.
It's knowing how to read the chronology system not as a rap sheet of bad behavior, but as a map of a student's nervous system.
It is about building systems where the staff is encouraged to reconnect those fragmented puzzle pieces through a lens of care, not suspicion. It requires leaders who champion professional curiosity without sacrificing the pastoral, nurturing environment that a school is supposed to be.
Well, we have covered incredible ground today. We explored the danger of the burned-out check engine light and the illusion of closure.
We covered a lot of psychology, yeah.
We broke down how cognitive load forces us to crave certainty, leading to the masking of real harm. We walked through the physical reality of safeguarding chronologies, how piecing together the puzzle reveals that what looks like a single explosive outburst is actually a 3-year cry for help.
The patterns are always there.
Always. And we confronted the deep humility required to look at our own past actions, realizing that time and culture change the lens through which we view evidence. The source leaves us with a really profound summary.
It does.
It tells us that the most important question for a safeguarding professional isn't, why didn't we know?
No, the real question is, did we stop looking too soon?
Yeah.
Protecting people sometimes requires the immense courage to take a second look at what everyone else has already filed away. To recognize that truths don't disappear. They just become quieter, buried beneath time, assumptions, or the sheer exhausting desire for organizational closure.
And I want to connect this directly back to you, the person listening to this right now. You might be commuting to a corporate office or prepping for a meeting or just, going about your day.
This applies everywhere.
It really does. This dynamic applies to human nature in every setting. I want you to evaluate your own environments, your workplace, your friendships, your family dynamics. What files have you mentally closed simply because it was convenient?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. What interpersonal issues did you label as resolved just because the immediate friction faded away, rather than because the underlying problem was actually healed?
We all have those files in our lives. The relationships or the risks we stopped looking at because the silence felt like a solution.
We really do.
Yeah.
And I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought that builds on everything we've discussed today. We talked about how the passage of time and evolving cultural norms profoundly change how we view past behaviors.
Right, the attention-seeking example.
Exactly. We look back at old school logs and realize that what the system confidently called attention-seeking was actually a frantic, unmet need for safety. So if we know for a fact that our cultural lens is always evolving, what behaviors in our current society are we completely mislabeling today?
Oh, that's a brilliant point.
We do not yet have the vocabulary to understand every modern cry for help. What is the 2026 equivalent of attention-seeking that 10 years from now, a new generation of professionals will look back at in our digital files and realize was an obvious signal we entirely missed?
Something we're just blind to right now.
Exactly.
Right.
So as you go through your week, try to look at the people around you, not just with the arrogant certainty of the present moment, but with the curiosity of that detective in the basement, staring at the files, knowing there is always more to the story than what is written on the cover.